things happen, she said, about the disabled veteran who broke his wrist and got a concussion because of her. I already knew she'd charged his family $340 under the table for a dog that was never trained the way she promised. Steady pause was my idea before it was Whitney's, but I never once resented sharing credit for it because for 6 years, she was the best partner I could have asked for. We started the nonprofit in a rented storage unit behind a Petco in Columbus with $1,100 between us and a dog named Otis that nobody else wanted. By the time this all happened, we had a 14,000 square foot training facility, 4 full-time instructors, and a waiting list of 206 disabled veterans who needed service dogs and couldn't afford the $18,000 to $40,000 a fully trained one usually costs. We gave them away, free. That was the whole point. Whitney handled the money and the grants. I handled the training program and the placements. It worked because I trusted her completely, and because I was too busy running obedience drills at 6 in the morning to look too closely at spreadsheets. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth of how it started. The first time something felt wrong, it was such a small thing, I almost didn't write it down. It was a Tuesday in February, and I was doing quarterly file review for our biggest grant, a federal award through the VA's Assistance Dog Partnership Program worth $250,000 a year, renewable annually as long as we hit 60 verified placements and kept our training documentation clean. I pulled the file for a black lab named Scout, who'd been placed with a veteran named Corporal Ansel Diaz 4 months earlier for mobility assistance. The training log said Scout had completed 400 hours of certified instruction. 400 hours is our standard. It takes about that long to get a dog reliable enough to trust with someone's physical safety. I only noticed the problem because our facility had switched to a keycard entry system that January, and out of habit, I cross-checked Scout's kennel assignment against the entry logs to see which trainer had been working him most. The keycard system showed Scout's kennel door opening for training sessions a total of 19 times between October and December. 19 sessions, roughly 3 hours each. That's 62 hours, not 400. I remember sitting at my desk in the back office with the space heater rattling under the window, staring at those two numbers side by side, thinking I'd made an error somewhere. I closed the file and told myself it was a data entry mistake. Somebody probably mistyped the log software. It happens. I didn't mention it to Whitney that day. I told myself I'd bring it up casually next time I saw her. No big deal. Just double-checking our numbers before the grant renewal. But that week she was slammed doing site visits with 2 other veteran families, and then I had my own placements to manage, and the conversation kept not happening. 2 weeks slid by like that. I want to be honest that some part of me didn't bring it up because some part of me already didn't want the answer. What actually pushed me to look further wasn't Scout's file at all. It was a phone call from a woman named Priya Nair, one of our 4 instructors, on a Thursday night in early March. I was on my couch with my own dog, a rescue mutt named Biscuit, half asleep on my lap, when Priya called and asked if she could talk to me off the record. Off the record about what? I said. There was a long pause. I could hear her television playing in the background, then going quiet, like she'd muted it. Whitney asked me to backdate 2 training logs last month, Priya said, for the Kessler placement and the Ortiz placement. She said it was a one-time thing, just to line up paperwork with a grant timeline. I did it because she's my boss and she made it sound like nothing, but I keep thinking about it and it doesn't feel like nothing. I asked her what exactly she'd been asked to do, and
Sorry to interrupt. Real quick before the story continues. If this story hit close to home, here's the thing. Most people don't figure this stuff out until years later, after it's already cost them something. I put together the manipulation playbook so you don't have to learn it the hard way. 49 patterns, real examples, and exactly what to do the moment you spot one. It's already helped hundreds of people see clearly what took me years to figure out. Links in the description. Okay, back to what happened.
She said Whitney had given her 2 files and asked her to sign as the certifying instructor on training hours that Priya hadn't actually logged herself. Dated for weeks in January when Priya said she'd been on vacation in Michigan visiting her parents. I asked her if she had proof of the vacation, thinking like an idiot that I was building a case against my own friend inside my own head before I even knew there was a case to build. She said she had plane tickets if it mattered. I told her it might. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed running the math on Scout's file over and over. 62 hours against 400, 62 against 400, until Biscuit finally got annoyed with me shifting around and jumped off the bed. The next morning, I called my sister Denise, mostly because I needed to say the sentence out loud to someone who wasn't involved. Denise runs a dental office in Cincinnati and has never once been impressed by anything I do, which is exactly why I like talking to her. I think Whitney might be faking training records. I told her over the phone while I sat in my car in the Steady Pause parking lot, engine off, not ready to go inside yet. Faking them how? Denise said. I don't know yet. That's the problem. Well, don't go in there and accuse her of anything until you actually know, Denise said, which was good advice, and also advice I clearly needed to hear from somebody who wasn't emotionally involved. You've been best friends since college. If you're wrong about this, you can't take it back. I told her I wasn't planning on accusing anybody of anything. I was planning on finding out. That was the moment the next phase started, though I didn't think of it that way at the time. I thought of it as being careful, being thorough, doing my job. I didn't let myself use the word investigation, not even privately, because using that word would have meant admitting what I already half knew. The first thing I did on a Friday afternoon when Whitney was off-site doing a donor lunch was ask Nadine at the front desk for copies of the full keycard entry logs for the last grant cycle, October through December. I told her it was routine audit prep for the renewal application, which was true, just not the whole truth. Nadine printed 41 pages without asking a single question, because that's the kind of place we ran. Low on suspicion, high on trust. I remember the printer jamming twice and Nadine swearing at it under her breath, and the smell of the industrial dog shampoo we used, always a little bit in the air of that building no matter which room you were in. I took the logs home instead of reading them at my desk. I spread all 41 pages across my kitchen table that night with a yellow legal pad and started matching kennel numbers to training log claims, one dog at a time. 14 active or recently closed placement files from that cycle. By 11 o'clock, I had gone through 9 of them. 9 out of 14 showed the same pattern as Scout. Not close, not roughly similar. The exact same shape of lie, over and over, hours logged in the paperwork that had no matching keycard activity to support them. A German Shepherd named Rosie, placed with a veteran for PTSD support, had a training log claiming 380 hours and a keycard history showing 55. A yellow lab named Diesel, placed with a man named Marcus Webb for seizure alert work, showed 390 hours claimed against 71 actual. And every single one of the 9 falsified files carried the same certifying signature at the bottom, Dale Kirchner. I knew that name. Dale had been one of our instructors, a good one, quiet, methodical, great with reactive dogs. He'd resigned in March of the previous year to move to Arizona for his wife's job. I remembered his goodbye party, a sheet cake from Kroger, somebody's toddler eating frosting off the corner with her hands. I pulled the dates on the 9 falsified logs. Every single one was signed and dated after March 14th. Dale's last day, according to our own personnel file, was March 11th. I sat at my kitchen table at almost midnight with Biscuit snoring under the chair next to me, and I looked at a dead man's signature. Not dead, I mean gone from the organization, but it felt that stark in the moment, forged onto document after document, and I understood for the first time that this wasn't sloppy paperwork. Somebody had sat down and decided to do this on purpose, 9 separate times, and I was pretty sure I knew who. I still didn't confront her. I want to be honest about that, because at this point, some version of me that likes to think of herself as brave wants to say I marched in Monday morning and demanded answers. I didn't. I photographed all 41 pages of keycard logs with my phone and backed them up to a personal cloud account under a folder labeled, embarrassingly, Vet Apt Records, because I genuinely thought if Whitney ever looked at my phone, she wouldn't open a folder about the dog's teeth cleaning. Then I went back to work Monday and acted normal. I ran a training session with a new intake dog, a nervous border collie mix named Pepper, who wouldn't make eye contact with anybody. And I remember standing in the yard behind the facility watching Pepper flinch at a passing car, thinking that at least dogs are honest about being scared. I need to say something about what those weeks were actually like, because it wasn't just one long, grim investigation montage. It was mostly ordinary. That's what made it awful. I'd be sitting across from Whitney at our Tuesday staff meeting, watching her laugh at something one of the trainers said, watching her genuinely actually care about a dog that wasn't progressing well in its socialization work, and I'd think, this is the same woman. I couldn't reconcile the two versions of her, so mostly I just didn't try. I filed it away and kept documenting. About 10 days after the keycard discovery, I got access to something I wasn't looking for. We shared a cloud drive for organizational documents, and Whitney had never removed my edit permissions from a folder she'd created the previous fall labeled development planning, which turned out to be a euphemism for something else entirely. Inside was a spreadsheet titled Sponsorship Adjustments. I opened it on a Wednesday during my lunch break, sitting alone in the break room eating a sad turkey sandwich, and it took me a minute to understand what I was looking at. It was a running ledger of veteran families, 31 of them, each with a dollar figure next to their name ranging from $210 to $600, averaging out to about $340 per family. Next to the dollar column was a note field. Most of them said things like expedited processing fee or priority placement contribution. At the bottom of the spreadsheet, a running total, $10,540. We do not charge veteran families anything. That's not a slogan we put on a brochure. It's the entire reason the organization exists. I called the number on the last line of the spreadsheet's footer, a bank routing reference, using the little bit of finance knowledge I'd absorbed over 6 years of being Whitney's partner, and matched it against our organizational bank statements, which I did have legitimate access to as co-founder. It wasn't our account. It ended in 4471. We didn't have an account ending in 4471. I sat in that break room with a half-eaten sandwich in my hand and felt something shift in my chest, a kind of cold click, like a door latching. This wasn't sloppy paperwork anymore, and it wasn't even just about hitting a grant quota anymore. This was Whitney taking money, actual money, from disabled veterans who had been told, in writing on our own intake forms, that Steady Paws was completely free. I called Denise again that night. It's worse, I told her. How much worse? She's charging veterans money, under the table, $10,000 at least that I've found so far. Denise went quiet for a second. Reagan, you need to talk to a lawyer before you do anything else. Not confront her. A lawyer. I told her I would, and I meant it. But I didn't do it that week because that week something happened that made the money feel almost secondary. I was updating placement files for our quarterly board report when I came across an incident report I didn't remember seeing before, filed in a folder that wasn't the standard incident report folder, tucked instead into general correspondence where it would be easy to miss. It was was dated April 2nd. It concerned Marcus Webb, the veteran who'd been placed with Diesel, the yellow lab trained, allegedly, for 390 hours to detect and alert before seizures. The report, 2 paragraphs, clinical and short, said that Diesel had failed to alert before a seizure Marcus experienced at home. Marcus had fallen down a flight of interior stairs during the seizure and been taken to the ER, where he was treated for a fractured wrist and a concussion. The report noted that Diesel would be scheduled for a training reassessment. There was no indication anywhere in the file that this incident had ever been reported to the Grants Oversight Board, which our funding agreement required within 72 hours of any placement-related safety incident. I remember reading it twice to make sure I understood the dates correctly. April the 2nd. It was now the 3rd week of April. 19 days, and nothing had been filed. I thought about the 71 actual hours behind Diesel's forged 390-hour training record, and I thought about a man falling down a flight of stairs alone in his own house because a dog that was supposed to save his life hadn't been trained long enough to do it, and I had to get up from my desk and walk outside into the parking lot and just stand there for a few minutes breathing. That was the first time I tried to say something to Whitney directly, and the first time I lost my nerve. I went back inside, found her in her office reviewing a grant budget on her laptop, and I said, as casually as I could manage, "Hey, did we ever follow up on the incident with Marcus Webb and Diesel? I saw a report but nothing about it going to the Oversight Board." Whitney didn't even look up right away. "Oh, that," she said. "We handled that internally. Diesel just needs some refresher work. It's not a big deal. These things happen with alert dogs sometimes, even good ones. I didn't want to spook the board over something we're already fixing. It says he broke his wrist. I know, it's awful. I felt terrible about it," she said. And she did sound like she felt terrible, which confused me more than if she'd sounded cold about it. "I'm handling it, Reagan. I promise." I said, "Okay." And I walked out of her office. And I hated myself a little for saying okay, but I also didn't yet have anything I could put in front of her that she couldn't explain away, with the same soft, reasonable voice she used to explain everything. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. I lay in bed with Biscuit pressed against my side, and I made a list in my phone's notes app of every family I could think of who'd mentioned behavioral problems with their dogs in the past 6 months. I got to 9 names before I made myself stop and put the phone down, because I realized I was building an investigation at 1 in the morning instead of sleeping, and because the list kept growing every time I thought about it a little longer. The next few weeks I want to describe honestly, because it wasn't a clean, tidy pattern of one revelation a week. It was messier than that. There was a night I sat in my car outside Whitney's condo for 40 minutes with her spreadsheet pulled up on my phone, genuinely intending to go knock on her door and just ask her everything at once, get it over with. I watched her kitchen light go on and off. I watched her walk past her window with a mug in her hand. I never got out of the car. I told myself it was because I didn't have enough yet, and I drove home telling myself that, and I think it was partly true, and partly just fear. There was another night, about a week later, when I called Priya again, this time to ask if she'd be willing to give me a written statement about the backdating, just for my own records. Nothing official yet. She said yes, but her voice was tight and scared on the phone, and she asked me twice if this was going to cost her her job. I told her I didn't know, because I honestly didn't. I started following up on that list of 9 families. I couldn't call them directly without tipping Whitney off if word got back to her. So I did it carefully, using our routine post-placement satisfaction survey as cover, which we send at 90 days as standard practice anyway. 5 of the 9 families reported ongoing behavioral concerns significant enough that, under our actual training protocol, the dog should have been pulled back in for reassessment. In every one of the 5 cases, Whitney's file notes said some version of the same phrase: needs more bonding time at home, recommend patience rather than clinical intervention. One of the 5 was a woman named Carol Whitfield, whose psychiatric service dog was supposed to interrupt panic attacks, and instead, according to Carol's survey response, had bitten her 12-year-old son on the forearm hard enough to require 4 stitches 6 weeks earlier. Whitney had never flagged it. Whitney had written in the file, isolated incident, dog is bonding well otherwise. I printed that survey response, and I remember my hands were actually shaking a little as it came out of the printer. Not from cold, from something closer to rage, an emotion I don't usually let myself sit in for long. A 12-year-old kid needed stitches, and Whitney wrote, bonding well otherwise, and kept collecting grant money on the file. By the 2nd week of May, I had a folder, a real one, an accordion file I bought at Staples for $4.99, because at some point the cloud folders stopped feeling like enough, containing the keycard logs, the 9 forged files with Dale Kirchner's impossible signature, the sponsorship spreadsheet with its $10,540 total, the buried incident report on Marcus Webb, Carol Whitfield's bite report, and Priya's written statement. I hadn't gone to a lawyer yet. I told myself I was still gathering. What finally moved me off that spot was a phone call I made to the grant program's regional office, using a general information line, not identifying myself by name, just asking a policy question about renewal requirements. A woman named Denise, a different Denise, which felt like a strange, small joke the universe was playing on me, confirmed that our $250,000 renewal, due for certification by June 30th, required documentation of 60 verified placements with third-party instructor certification, and that any placement found to involve falsified training records could result not just in denial of renewal, but in the organization being required to repay prior disbursed funds and possible referral for federal grant fraud. June 30th. I hung up the phone and did the math. It was May 19th. We had 42 days. And then, 3 days after that call, I found out about the gala. Whitney announced it at our Tuesday staff meeting, practically glowing. Our annual fundraising gala, always in June, would this year double as a public celebration of what she called our 60th placement milestone, timed intentionally to coincide with a grant renewal. The regional program officer, a man named Terrence Boyd, had confirmed he'd be attending in person to present a ceremonial renewal check on stage. Local news had already agreed to cover it. Several veteran families, including, she said without a flicker of anything on her face, Marcus Webb, had been invited as honored guests. Marcus is coming, she said, smiling at the room. Isn't that wonderful? After everything, he still believes in what we do here. I sat in that meeting and looked at her and thought, she is going to stand on a stage in front of a man whose wrist she let break and accept $250,000 built on 9 forged signatures, and she is smiling about it right now while she tells us the plan. The gala was set for June 8th, 19 days away. That was, I realized, the last possible moment before the fraud got sealed permanently into a signed federal renewal. And it was also, whether Whitney meant it this way or not, the only room where everyone who needed to see the truth at the same time would already be sitting together. I spent the next 2.5 weeks doing 2 things. I finally actually walked into a lawyer's office, a nonprofit compliance attorney named Farrah Michaels, whose fee for the first consultation was $200, which I paid out of my own checking account because I didn't want it anywhere near organizational funds. I laid the accordion folder out on her conference table exactly the way I'd built it, and she went through it page by page for almost 2 hours, occasionally making a small sound in her throat that I came to understand meant she'd found something even worse than what I'd flagged for her. This is not paperwork sloppiness, she told me. This is a pattern. I want you to make a full duplicate of every document here today, store 1 copy somewhere she has no access to, and I want you to think very carefully about how and where you disclose this, because right now you're the only person besides her who has all of it. The second thing I did was quietly, carefully, put together a short presentation. Not an ambush, not something designed to humiliate anyone for the sake of it. I want to be honest that I went back and forth on that line more than once, but something factual enough, documented enough, that it couldn't be waved away with a soft voice and the word isolated. 2 nights before the gala, I barely slept. I lay in bed running through what I'd say, rewriting it in my head a dozen times, biscuit curled against my legs, and at one point around 2 a.m., I got up and just sat at my kitchen table with a folder open in front of me again, running my thumb along the edge of Marcus Webb's incident report, like it might tell me something new. It didn't. It just sat there, still true, the way it had been true for weeks, while nobody outside that folder knew it yet. The gala was held at the Grand Ballroom of the Belcourt Hotel downtown. 340 guests, according to the final head count Whitney had bragged about at the last staff meeting. White tablecloths, a slideshow of placement photos looping on 2 big screens flanking the stage, a string quartet doing something quiet during cocktail hour. I remember the smell of the flower arrangements, white peonies, too sweet, and the particular sound of that many wine glasses all being set down on tables at once. Marcus Webb was there, in a navy blazer, his wrist still in a brace, sitting at a table near the front with his wife. Diesel wasn't with him that night, dogs weren't part of the seated dinner, but I saw Marcus glance toward the stage a few times with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between hope and exhaustion. Terrence Boyd, the program officer, arrived a little after 7, a tall man in his 50s with a government-issue navy suit and a leather folio under his arm, the ceremonial check already printed and waiting backstage. I'd met him twice before, both times briefly. Both times he'd struck me as somebody who took the actual mission seriously, and not just the optics of it. Whitney's speech started around 8:30. She was good at this. Genuinely good, warm, funny, self-deprecating in exactly the right places, the kind of speaker who makes a ballroom feel like a living room. She talked about our storage unit beginnings, about Otis, our very first dog. She got a laugh describing how bad our first fundraising letter had been. Then she pivoted, her voice dropping into something more solemn, and said we were here tonight not just to celebrate, but to mark something historic. Our 60th successful placement of a fully trained service dog with a veteran in need, funded in large part by the extraordinary partnership of the federal government, represented tonight by Program Officer Terrence Boyd, who she invited up to the stage. I was standing near the side of the room by then, the accordion folder, thinner now, curated down to the pieces that mattered most, maybe 15 pages, plus a tablet loaded with the keycard scans and Priya's recorded statement, held against my side like it might somehow give me a way through the fabric of my dress. Terrence walked up, shook Whitney's hand, and unfolded the leather folio to reveal the check. $250,000, printed in that oversized ceremonial font made out to Steady Paws ink. The room started to applaud. I walked up the 3 low stage steps before I could talk myself out of it. Sorry, I said into the closest handheld mic, which one of the AV guys had left on a stand near the podium. Before we finish this, I need 30 seconds for a transparency addendum. It's part of our grant compliance obligations, and I think everyone in this room deserves to see it, especially our honored veteran families. Whitney's smile didn't move, but something behind her eyes did. Reagan, we can do program updates after dinner. This can't wait until after dinner, I said, and I clicked the tablet awake and connected it to the same screen still showing our slideshow, and the peaceful loop of dogs and veterans cut away to a spreadsheet. I put the keycard log for Scout up first, side by side with the training files claim of 400 hours. This is a real access record from our own building system, I said. 62 hours. This is what was submitted to the federal grant program program as 400. I heard the room's noise change, that particular hush of a few hundred people simultaneously deciding to pay attention. This is a mistake. That's an old system error. I can explain that after, Whitney said, stepping toward the podium, but I kept going because Farah had told me, don't stop once you start. Let the documents do the talking and don't get pulled into a back and forth before you've shown everything. I put up the 9 forged files next. Dale Kirchner's signature highlighted in yellow on each one, next to his personnel record showing his last day of employment. 9 placement files were certified by an instructor 8 months after he left the organization, I said. 9 separate dogs given to 9 separate veteran families with training records that were not true. Reagan, this is a private personnel matter. This isn't the venue. Whitney's voice had gone thinner. It's a filing error, she said next, louder, to the room now instead of to me. Somebody on staff clearly made a clerical mistake during our system migration last year, and I take responsibility for not catching it sooner, but this is not what it's being made to look like. A minimizing note in her voice now. Reasonable, almost bored, the same tone she'd used on me in her office about Marcus's wrist. I put up Marcus Webb's incident report next, the 2 clinical paragraphs, his name and Diesel's name and the date, April 2nd, and the fracture and the concussion, and I watched the room's attention swing physically toward the table where Marcus was sitting, his wife's hand suddenly gripping his good arm. Federal grant compliance requires incident reports like this be filed with the oversight board within 72 hours, I said. This one is 38 days old tonight, and it has never been filed. You're jealous, Whitney said, and the word landed strangely in the room. Too personal, too small for the size of the accusation building around her. You've been upset since the board discussed making me executive director last quarter, and I understand that, I do. But sabotaging tonight in front of Terrence, in front of all these families who trust us. Reagan, is this really who you want to be? I felt the old, familiar pull to apologize, the 6 years of friendship trying to reach up and grab my sleeve, and I let it pass through me instead of answering it. I don't want the title, I said. I want the dogs to actually be trained for 400 hours before we hand them to somebody whose life might depend on them. That was when Marcus Webb stood up. He stood up slowly, favoring the wrist, his wife half rising with him like she wasn't sure if he wanted help or wanted to be left alone, and the whole ballroom's attention swung with him. I want to ask something, he said, and his voice wasn't loud, but the room had gone quiet enough that it carried anyway. Whitney, you told me Diesel just needed bonding time. You told me that to my face, twice, after he didn't alert and I went down a flight of stairs and broke my wrist trying to catch myself. You're telling this room right now it's a filing error. Was my incident report a filing error too? Because it says right there it was never sent anywhere. Why wasn't it filed? Whitney opened her mouth, and for the first time all night, nothing came out of it right away. Marcus, I was trying to handle it the right way. I didn't want to alarm the board before You told me it wasn't a big deal, Marcus said. You told my wife it wasn't a big deal. I have a screw in my wrist now. Terrence Boyd, who had been standing off to the side with the leather folio still open in his hands, closed it. He didn't say it loudly, but in the hush, it might as well have been shouted. I'm going to need to hold this disbursement pending a compliance review, he said. Ms. Reagan, I'll need copies of everything you've just shown, tonight if possible. The room didn't erupt into chaos exactly. It wasn't a movie. It was worse than that, in a way. It was quiet. 340 people sitting very still, watching a woman most of them had trusted for years, standing alone at a podium with nothing left to say. Whitney looked at the room, then at Marcus, and finally at me, and for just a second the performance dropped entirely, and what was underneath it was something closer to exhaustion than anger. I never meant for anyone to get hurt, she said, quietly enough that I don't think it was meant for the microphone at all. And then she stepped down off the stage and walked out through a side door, and nobody stopped her, and the string quartet, absurdly, was still packed up in the corner, not playing anything, and nobody moved to fill the silence with music. I stayed and answered Terrence Boyd's questions for almost 2 hours after most of the guests had gone home. I gave him copies of everything on the tablet before I left the building that night. Marcus Webb found me by the coat check on his way out and just said, thank you, twice. And I didn't have a response that felt big enough, so I just said I was sorry it took this long. I want to tell you the 8 months after that were dramatic in some clean, satisfying way, but mostly they were paperwork. A federal compliance review. A state nonprofit fraud investigation opened against Whitney personally, which is still, as I'm telling you this, ongoing. I genuinely don't know how that will end, and that's the one thread I can't hand you neatly tied up. The board voted unanimously to name me interim executive director, and then 4 months later, not interim anymore. We restructured the entire certification process so that no in-house instructor can be the sole signature on a training file anymore. Every single completed placement now gets verified by an independent third-party auditor before it ever gets submitted to any grant program. It costs us more. I don't care. It's been 8 months now since that night at the Bell Court. Diesel got pulled from active service and is living out a very happy retirement with Marcus's in-laws, who spoil him rotten, while Marcus was matched with a new dog, a black lab named Juniper, who this time has an actual 400 hours behind her, every one of them verifiable, an outside auditor's signature on the last page instead of a dead man's. Last week, I stood in our training yard on placement day, handing Juniper's leash to Marcus myself, and he crouched down, carefully. The wrist still isn't quite right in cold weather, he tells me, and let the dog lean her whole body weight into him the way the good ones do. And he looked up at me and said he'd started volunteering on Saturdays now, greeting new families when they come in for their first intake meeting, telling them what to actually expect. We have a framed copy of Juniper's full, real, unforged forged training log up on a new wall in the lobby now, next to 4 others just like it, what we're calling the transparency wall. And every time I walk past it, I think about a printer jamming in a front office on an ordinary Friday and how close I came to just letting it stay jammed. I still think about Dale Kirshner sometimes. Honestly, we never actually reached him. Never told him his name had been used 9 separate times on documents he had nothing to do with. 8 months and a couple thousand miles removed from any of it. I've thought about calling him more than once. I still might. I just haven't figured out what I'd even say. Anyway, if you made it this far, thank you for sitting with the whole thing. If this is the kind of story you want more of, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments what you think happened in Whitney's head the night she decided $10,000 and a forged signature were worth more than the truth. I read every single one.